NLove here. More with um, some information about the science fiction, extrapolative fiction piece that I'm writing called Return to Innocence. Game over. I want to make it very clear what people say who are in the resistance when they are asked protection questions. I'm going to post links to the other components of this story. It's been serialized. I am wanting to get it out. I don't have the luxury of the time. I am not in a financial or domestic context. I've got to find my cats and get them home. This little pin reminds me of my cats that are not with me right now, but I've got to get them back and get them safe with me. So I just have way too much to do right now to sit around writing a screenplay or a book. The information is too important, and I feel very compelled to get it out, and this is the way I'm choosing to do that. So, here's the thing. The people in this so-called fictional context who are in the resistance, the people who do not want to be enslaved in something called the game, the people who have moral character and dignity and who deserve and understand that their lives were about freedom, people who understand what the natural world is really like, and that in a natural world, nobody would be ever asked such an unholy question as anything to do with the protection game. These people learn to answer protection games thusly, and it's extremely important that you remember the correct answer when you're asked a question in this fictional context, of course. How to answer a question about the game. If someone says, "Would you marry so and so to save his or her life?" Or "Would you sacrifice your sister to save your brother's life?" Or "Would you, sacrifice this life in order to save the other life?" Regardless of the species, the age, whatever. Would you sacrifice your grandmother's life to save your grandfather's life? Or blah, 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 blah. Uh-uh. You refuse to offer sacrifice, including that of your own life. You refuse to choose between innocent lives. You refuse even at some point to choose between guilty lives, and by guilty lives, I mean those so corrupt that they would willingly be so enslaved. And there are people so corrupt that they would embrace a system like this if they thought they could profit for it, get famous, politically powerful, a mansion, a fat bank account, or in a big car. They would play the game with your life. And there are people like that in real life, not just this fictional context that I've got in my mind. But and please keep in mind that I didn't just sit around and think up something so horrifying and foul. Like a lot of science fiction, much of what I'm talking about is based straight out of reality. Here's the way you answer protection questions. When someone called a willful perpetuator asks you to make a sacrifice or to offer a sacrifice of someone else's lives, be it your, cousin's pet hamster or your grandmother or whatever, you say, "I refuse to make a choice of that nature because it is truly unnatural and unholy. But I would sacrifice yours because you are a willful perpetuator of the game." And as soon as this response becomes so common and so ubiquitous, in fact, which means it's everywhere, it's everywhere. As soon as so many people rise and refuse to play the game and refuse to answer protection questions at all in any fashion and say, "No, I wouldn't sacrifice my life and I wouldn't sacrifice anyone else's of any species, but I'd sacrifice yours because you're so foul and you're so corrupt and you're so pathetic and you're so immoral that you ask protection questions to begin with. You're what's called a willful perpetuator of the game. You gotta go. Turns out, in this fictional context, willful perpetuators start walking into the sea and not walking back out. They start jumping off cliffs. They start taking way too many sedatives and don't wake up once they go to sleep. They go to bed and they wake up dead because they can't stand themselves anymore. And they have to look so many crying people in the eye when their protection questions are refused that they can't stand the sight of themselves anymore. And their power, and their politics, and their fame, and their wealth seems like so much clanging cymbals, empty noise. Because at some point, even people so completely immoral, unholy, unnatural, undignified, even people who willfully perpetuate the game and would gladly enslave the entire population of humanity in this thing, they get some kind of sense of freedom from it. They get some kind of awakening to their own innocence. Some of them just plain old out and out join the resistance and stop asking protection questions because they refuse newly and beautifully to play the game. And others are so horrifyingly and justifiably ashamed of themselves for living lifetimes of such sinful corruption that they would ask protection questions that enslave humanity, that they can't stand the sight of themselves in the mirror anymore, and they just do us all a favor and get off the world. They get off planet. Think about this, my friends. And when you are asked to become a slave and or to enslave others, remember that the warden is in the same prison as the prisoner. Refuse to play the game. And in this fictional context that I'm proposing here, that is how humanity frees ourselves. That is how we can all look one another in the face, free and happy again, and say, hey, game over, innocent ones. More later. I'm just getting started here.